Welcome to Designing the Future. This series is a space for dialogue, reflection, and imagination, where Indigenous voices lead the way in rethinking the systems that shape our lives. From education and healthcare to governance, economies, and beyond, we'll explore how Indigenous knowledge, lived experience, and cultural wisdom can guide us towards a more inclusive and equitable tomorrow. The conversations you'll hear are grounded in story and spirit. They are not just ideas, but lived realities that carry both resilience and responsibility. Some of what we share may be sensitive, as it touches on histories of harm, systemic inequities, and ongoing struggles faced by Indigenous peoples. We encourage you to listen with openness and care, and to remember that healing and transformation come through truth, respect, and relationship. This is not simply a podcast or a video series. It's an invitation to imagine new possibilities, to engage critically, and to act collectively. Together, let's design a future that honors Indigenous knowledge and creates space for equity, dignity, and respect for all. I'm your host, Laura Mueller, and this is Designing the Future. All right, welcome everyone. This is another episode of Designing the Future, and today we're going to be talking about youth, in particular Indigenous youth, and just get a perspective of where we are now, where we want to be. So today I have Priscilla Mueller with me, who happens to be my sister.
Yay!
So I'll let you explain who you are and a bit about your background and your experience with working with youth, and because you've worked with youth a lot. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Well, my name's Priscilla, and Laura's my sister. We were born and raised here in Prince George. And I'm a youth worker with YFC in Prince George, but part of my work is with transformations. I also help facilitate a grief and loss peer support group for teenagers. It was run through Rainbows Canada, but now they've decided to shut down for some reasons. So we are actually developing a new grief and loss peer support group called Lanterns.
Oh,
yeah,
that's
I'm
exciting.
excited.
Yeah.
And then, I don't know, just childhood was okay, I thought, when I was younger.
Right? Yeah.
You know, we have a mom, a dad. Dad goes to work. We go to school. You know, it's normal. But yeah, it was anything but normal.
Yeah. Kind of looking back, hindsight. When you're going through things, you don't process them from the lens of an outside perspective. No. It's just your lived experience.
Yeah.
And you don't necessarily have that awareness that trauma is happening to you.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think that's very common with Indigenous youth because they live in poverty. They live in, you know, they deal with intergenerational trauma. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, even talking about that grief and support, I kind of want to know, where are we now? What's happening? I guess that's a big question. I know that. But I'm trying to get a better understanding of the landscape, I guess.
Okay, well, unfortunately, grief and loss is life.
Yeah.
We're all going to go through it.
Yeah.
When we're young, we just assume that it's normal.
Yeah.
That everybody dies around us. I think the earliest piece of grief that I had to live through was because our backgrounds are a little bit different.
Yeah.
Right? So mine was when Mom met Dad, and we moved to go live with Dad in an apartment or a house or whatever.
Yep.
But I was actually taken from Musham and Cookham.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize that till I went through transformations to coach as an adult.
Yeah.
That was a major core wound in my life.
Absolutely.
Right? And then, so I think it caused me to just withdraw and repress everything because I was like 1 year old.
Well, even with culture and language, because Mom had always said that you didn't even know how to speak English in your formative years. And which is pretty crazy because when you think of all the language and culture we've lost, you know, that's almost this compounding of that. Yeah.
So that was an adjustment. And then going to school, to elementary schools where I was the only Indigenous student.
Yeah.
It was very hard. There was a lot of bullying and prejudice and racism, and it was very hard for me to make friends growing up.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't fully make any friends until we moved to on Creve Place, so grade 4,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So it's a lot. And then when Musham and Grandpa passed away, we weren't taken to the funerals. So in my mind, still as an adult, being in my 40s, I still have not grieved them because I didn't get a chance to know that they passed away. They're not here anymore. I'm never going to see them.
Yeah.
That's still some trauma that I know is coming.
Yeah.
But I haven't.
That disruption.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's interesting.
Yeah.
And I think, I mean, that was similar to my experience with identity issues, not being, especially with urban Indigenous youth. There's massive disconnects from not only cultural resources and supports, but there's an ingrained shame that comes with so much of that separation. And I think a huge component of my healing journey was reclaiming that and stepping into this version of myself that didn't feel that shame. And what do you think, like based on your experience with transformations and rainbows, what are some common themes you see around that with the youth as well?
Well, I've noticed that a lot of them believe that they're in this by themselves, that nobody else, this hasn't happened to anybody else, unless they physically see it happening.
Yeah.
They just assume that they're the only ones, right? So this shame can lead to like suicidal thoughts, just addictions, drinking, just so they don't have to face the hard stuff.
Yeah.
And it's sad.
Well, and I mean, that's usually where that stuff comes from. A lot of it, that underlying pain that we don't necessarily talk about or address. And I mean, it's really complex as well. And I found like talking about other things as well, even with education and housing, and quite often it's hard for people to conceptualize what it is that we need. Yeah. Because a lot of it's, it's that lived experience, right? So that can be very hard to contend with. People want to help, especially with allyship and things like that. But quite often the resources and supports that we receive aren't what they actually need to be. And it's those, how do we have those conversations? What is it? Because even with research, a lot of researchers come into communities or come in and they talk with marginalized and vulnerable populations, and they still don't get what they need from them because it's still this outside perspective. Yeah. And how do we start bridging that and creating relevant resources to what we need?
Yeah. It's funny because sometimes we don't even know what we need.
Yes, that's a very valid point. You're right, because I mean, I know I don't know if I've said this before on previous podcasts or, but when I was doing research with Indigenous entrepreneurs, we know access to capital and financial literacy are the biggest barriers. It comes up over and over again. However, what they actually asked for was community and healing. Yes, and that is completely different. So our conception of wealth isn't the same as a capitalist point of view. Yeah. We equate wealth with community. Yeah. And that's so just understanding that, it's like, okay, that changes so many different directions and so many different possibilities of how we could be approaching this, just from that understanding alone. Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know what kind of research has gone on with youth and what, like, I'm not in it. I don't see it. I know my experience, but I don't get to see, where the gaps are. Yeah. Where are some of those gaps right now?
Oh, wow. Okay. So as for youth living in communities and reservations, I honestly don't know. Yeah. Because we didn't grow up on a reserve.
Well, and the youth you work with are in, I mean, speak from your experience.
They're actually both. So I do work with a lot of Indigenous youth at Dutchess Park. I serve breakfast twice a week.
Yeah.
So I see a lot of them in there where it's like they're kind of afraid or ashamed to come get breakfast, right? But then at the same time, I see them wandering around by themselves or trying to fit in into groups, and they're just searching for their people.
Yeah.
And it's very hard to put yourself out there with new students, right? And then, sure, they go to school, but do they, like, the teachers are so overworked and the EAs that they actually don't have time for these youth.
Yeah.
So where are these youth getting their belonging or their validation from? That's, we need to start asking that, because if they're not finding it with their family or healthy people, they're going to find it in other ways. And that's where gangs come in.
Yeah.
Unhealthy relationships.
Yeah.
It's just,
So, and that's a very valid point, because the other thing is we're at capacity.
Yeah.
We're at capacity. So how can we try and think of innovative ways to address that if we're at capacity? What could we possibly do to kind of mitigate some of that?
Well, we definitely have to work together, because I've kind of noticed that some organizations will kind of do their own thing, right? But I think we do need to actually work together, even though we're different organizations with different things.
Yeah.
Like, we have a youth shelter here. We have a couple of drop-ins. Actually, we have 3 drop-in centers. And then we have other places for them to go. And then they have opportunities for sports. Like, there's this one Indigenous guy, he comes to youth group. He's wonderful. But he goes to his Kodiak's football practice and he bolts it to youth group, and then he just he's tired.
Yeah.
So he just kind of wants to sit there. So we actually just provide a place for him just to rest and just be there.
Yeah.
Right? So it just depends on the youth.
Yeah.
But also, too, with transformations, they come to Nest Lake Bible Camp for a week, the last week of March and the last week of August. And it is an amazing week for them. But then they go back to their communities, and it's like, even if something wonderful happens in them, or their spirit or their soul, they go back to these communities. And if they don't have youth workers or elders that are willing to, like, take them under their wings and just keep their journey going, it's kind of hard. And then, of course, I don't see that part.
Yeah.
So I don't know. So I think the communities and the cities do need to start working together as well.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, the whole reason I had returned to school, I wanted to look at exit services for Indigenous youth and ministry care. And I wanted to look at second stage recovery for urban Indigenous around recovery, particular with alcoholism and addiction. Because there is, I think that the efforts or the intention, like, people mean well, but meaning well can be different than providing what we actually need.
It could be hurtful.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. It could very much be re-traumatizing. I find that we're kind of now coming to the table and saying, okay, how can we do this from a perspective where it's Indigenous led, where it's people that have walked through their own healing journeys and understand the process and that, integration and what we actually require. Because again, as much as people mean well, and we do need allyship and we do need people to help. However, it kind of feels like we're running around in circles right now. And maybe it's just, again, capacity and the amount of people that need help. But one of the thoughts that I had as well was, what about evergreen content? if we look at for youth exiting ministry care services,
Yeah.
what about budgeting? What about, programs and resources? Because I was just reading something that said, the biggest gateway to homelessness is youth and ministry care.
Oh, yeah.
And that's kind of, we have all these issues with unhoused people and addictions. And it's like, but how can we actually move a little further back in the process and start providing the resources that they need now? Housing always kind of comes to the forefront because, there's just not enough social housing. But to me, and I think my kind of perspective, and of course, I'm not an expert in all of these areas, but how can we be more efficient? And again, that's
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a hard one because when we moved back, I was working at NCASE.
Yeah.
So it's group homes for the youth in the community. Some houses were ran by ministry and some houses were Carriers Canny. So the biggest problem that I saw was you're taking these kids out of their families and putting them in these group homes when they don't want to be there. They don't know you. They don't trust you. They don't want to listen. They don't want to go to school.
Yeah.
And then you're expecting them to learn how to take care of themselves when they age out. Like they actually do start 3 or 4 years before.
Yeah.
But if these youth don't trust you, don't want to be there, how are they going to actually want to start their healing? So they're in a place where they are willing to learn to budget. And they need a tribe around them that are going to help build them up and just give them belonging and love without any strings.
Yeah.
Like youth can see phony a mile away.
Yeah.
They need genuine, loving, trustful people in their lives.
Yeah.
And so, I don't see that happen too often. Yeah, it's sad.
Yeah, that is sad. It's the symposium that I held as well.
That was great.
Yeah.
It really was.
Yeah, thanks. One of the feedback that from one of the students was actually we just need people who love us.
Yes.
And we just need them to see us. And presence sometimes is so underrated. Yeah. And just having people that actually, I think this is why lived experience is so important.
Yes.
Because there's that empathy piece that just, it's like, okay, you're going to make this, you're going to make it through. I promise you can make it through. This is going to be hard, but you're not alone when you're doing it.
Yeah.
Because a lot of it, when I think of, oh man, all of the skills that I didn't learn as a child and then into youth and what I needed to kind of catch up on. I remember, I know we've had a conversation about this, but I remember when I did a test and emotionally I was an adult and I was super proud of myself because that takes a lot of healing work to actually become an emotional adult because a lot of adults aren't actually
emotionally intelligent.
Well, it's not even emotional intelligence. They're still, because of trauma and things like that, they get stuck, at the age of like 12 or 13 and they never grow from beyond that until they actually kind of go back and start to address all of that, right?
That actually happened to me.
Yeah.
This last spring, I was meeting with one of my mentors and I was shown that I got stuck at the age of 12.
Yeah.
Like the day Dad passed away, I was 12. So everybody was in the ICU room with him because he passed away. Yeah. And all I remember is that I was sitting in the waiting room by myself. And I literally got stuck there until this last spring. Yeah. When I walked out of that room.
Wow.
Like,
it's powerful.
It's just crazy how easy it is to get stuck.
Oh man. that thought alone, I think, first of all, the clarification is just super powerful. So if there's all these youth and children that are still stuck, how do we, and it's not even about rescuing them.
No.
I think that's what people misunderstand. It's like you cannot rescue people that are oppressed.
Yeah.
They have to take that power back themselves. And this system is not designed for us to take our power back.
Mm-hmm. They want us suppressed.
Exactly. So how do we build something that will make space for that creates the room to be able to empower people? That's social and restorative justice. And what does that look like?
Well, for me, it actually started when I started going back to church. Like, we were raised Catholic.
Yeah.
I don't remember learning anything. Like, I was there staring at people most of the time. Right? But I was at my rock bottom where the heavy drugs, the drinking, it was like almost every single day.
Yeah.
And then out of the blue on a Mother's Day, I phoned up our other sister, and she's doing picking up people for church. So I just phoned her up. Of course, I was hungover and probably still half drunk.
Yeah.
Come pick me up. I want to go to church.
Yeah.
And just meeting God in that place, I never expected to be where I am today. So I know there's a lot of a bad taste with religion amongst First Nations. But, to be honest, they showed us the wrong God.
Well, and I think a huge component of it is community.
Yeah.
I think, and like you said, not that I'm equating church with, that bad and unhealthy relationships, but, if you're not given or shown a healthier way, you make those attachments, those unhealthy attachments to, substances. And, that's where addictions informs, because you're looking for that attachment and that comfort, that nurturing. And often you find that within the addiction, but how can you find that within community, within yourself as well? Because even when I think of safety, to have a lot of these hard conversations and to be able to make progress and get to that restorative justice requires safety within.
Yes. Because,
and I've had a lot of difficult conversations lately. And there was this point I was actually doing a seminar in my PhD class, and I just dropped into it. And I'm like, no, I have to walk into this.
Yeah.
And then I did. I got brave, and I was like, where's your fear? What's holding you back? Mm-hmm. How can we actually start engaging in conversations that are meaningful? And a lot of it comes back to this oppression and people not understanding how oppression really works. Mm-hmm. And, what systemic marginalization looks like, racism. And because for the most people, for the most part, people that have never experienced racism don't, like, some of them don't even think it exists.
No.
Like, it's wild, because it's like, it is a real thing. Yeah. But if you've never experienced yourself, there's like no spatial awareness. I don't even know how to quite describe it, because it's like, if it's not tangible, then it's not real.
Yeah.
If a tree falls in the forest,
did it really fall?
Yeah, exactly. Did it make sound, right?
Actually, so we had a good conversation about that the other day, how truth and reconciliation, people may want it, but if you didn't see it, or you weren't part of it because your ancestors were, you don't believe that it happened or that you're responsible for it.
Yeah.
Right? But to be honest, I think everybody at some point is responsible for some of it.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
Right? So,
well, even ourselves.
Yeah.
Because school really was a huge component of me working through my internalized colonial belief system. Because you're not even aware. And there was this moment in my leadership class, actually, where we were doing these one-on-one conversations, and I got the opportunity to work with a professor. And it was actually with our other sister. I had this moment where I realized that when we take away people's choices,
Yeah. Free will.
that's exactly what colonialism is about.
Yeah.
Because it's power and control.
Yeah.
And how do we actually give people their power and control back? But people in positions of power don't want to hand their power over to somebody else because that's kind of where these issues with land back comes, because it's like, well, if we give back Indigenous people the land, where does that leave us where does that leave non-Indigenous people, right? And there's an underlying assumption in that we're automatically
kick us off the land.
Well, we're going to harm you.
Yeah.
But that I have never thought that that's what would happen. No. And I don't think that's what Indigenous people believe either. But because the history is so violent, they automatically assume that that's the course of action that would happen. And I think that's part of the problem is we're not having these conversations. And really a lot of misunderstanding comes from fear. Yeah. How there's, only enough, there's only so much. And if you take this, then I don't have enough. And, but I've had this profound, thought in the last little bit. And I'm like, oh no, I think I lost it.
Good job.
Maybe I didn't. Maybe I don't have this figured out, right? So that's so funny. Yeah, that's exactly it. I know the whole thing is this is messy. Mm-hmm. When we're dealing with homelessness and addiction and youth and there's a lot of anger. Yeah. There is a lot of anger that we have not yet expressed. Yeah. And I think people just want to avoid that because they just want to, what I hear quite often is, we just want everybody to get along. But you have to respect and understand that people need to process this before we can actually move to that stage of it. So, I mean, we're taxed with counseling. We're at capacity. We know that we have so many resources and stuff like that. And I would like the youth to be able to have more voice for them to be able to talk about, what's going on with them a lot more. Because I think back, man, me at 18,
right?
Holy crap. I was so lost. I was so afraid to ask for help. I had no clue where to ask for help. And I felt like the whole world just didn't like me or love me. Yeah. And because that's what is reflected back to us, I think a lot of the time. And man, I wish they knew that that's not the truth. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So transformations, they come for a week.
Yeah.
And I've watched this process. I just finished my 5th camp, so it's been about a year and a half.
Yeah.
So we watch these youth from different communities around BC, Alberta, and the Yukon. Yeah. And they come for a week. And of course, they're anxious right from day one because first of all, they're coming to a Bible camp.
Yeah.
Then secondly, they're coming to a camp where they don't know anybody but the people they're coming with. Yeah. Right? So there's a lot of fear and anxiety. And watching the process of the teaching we do, and then just the way intentionally how the chairs are set up, and the leaders are with them, and they get fed. Usually by the second night, it's like a light switch goes off the next morning. It's like the anxiety is completely gone. They're making new friends. They're actually in it. And my fear is when they go home, are they actually going to share what they learned? Or are there people that care to listen to what happened to them? Like a week. Sure, it seems like it's not very long, 5 days, right? But the process of transformations, it is beautiful. Like they actually start their healing, but then they need people to guide them once they get back home.
So is there something specific that triggers it?
like triggers their...
Yeah, like where the light switch happens, or is it a combination of support and community and safe space and food? Food is actually massive.
It's I think it is a combination of everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because one of the core concepts that keeps coming back up over and over again, even in terms of like wealth and well-being, is cultural dishes and cultural food.
Yeah.
And how we can, I think of dry fish and salmon and like dry
You
meat.
got to tell the story.
I know, because it's I love dry fish so much when I was little that I actually hid some in a closet and forgot about it.
Gross.
And then and then my mom found the smell like I don't know how long later, and
a couple weeks.
Yeah, and
dry fish in the towel closet.
Yeah, I hid it in the living closet. But I think about it now too. I actually don't have access to that. I don't even know the last time I had dry meat, because when we were little, I remember going to Angelique's with Mom and being in the smokehouse and actually seeing all of the fish being hung up and dried. And I remember, there were moments where we seen hunting and skinning and hiding and tanning and all of that. And so we were very fortunate to be blessed, and even with Cookham and seeing her use of traditional medicines. So
me, it was her moccasins.
Yeah.
I loved watching
Yeah, because it's still like the smell of hide. Like we just...
real moose hide.
Yeah. And, going to powwows often when we were kids. So I don't think it's culture alone. I know that a lot of people say that reclaiming that cultural piece is extremely important, and it is.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's just that. I think there's more to it, because if that were the case, then I think we would have been better off, so to speak.
I think the first step is that we need to be aware of the shame operating.
Yeah.
Because I didn't really know, like I was used to growing up in the city.
Yeah.
So I didn't realize I had shame until I went to Arizona for YWAM. And I was there for 5 months. And within the first week, the leader who ran it was Korean.
Yeah.
And she pulled me aside and said, "Why are you ashamed to be Native?" And I was like, "I'm not." And she said, "I'm sorry, but yeah, you are."
Wow.
So that was where it all started for me.
Wow.
Like the creator knows it all.
Yeah.
He really does. Because I thought I was going to a base where it was the cheapest one,
Yeah.
My faith wasn't extremely high then.
Yeah, because you worked with Indigenous communities there for,
It was like the Hopis, the Navajos, the Paiute tribe, even the Polynesians with their tribal tattoos.
Yeah.
And then a lady from Fiji, Australia,
Well, even when you got to in high school, go to
Albuquerque. Oh, that was an amazing powwow.
Yeah. See, and I think I know we used to have powwows here, and that's something that I've heard community members talk about.
We need to get it back.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a huge component of celebration. I think a lot of ritual. I think what we're really missing right now, and what I've seen, the whole crux of my PhD work is how do we actually reintegrate ceremony?
Yeah.
And how do because those ritual components, because that's really what our ceremonies are based around. A lot of it is ritual, like, naming ceremonies and moving from, being a youth into womanhood and manhood. And,
definitely.
And things
the
like
rites
that.
of passage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we're missing a lot of because even wealth was very ceremonial in nature. And, we made sure that everybody had enough.
Yeah.
And nobody was kind of left behind. So, that's an interesting question. How do we reintegrate ritual and ceremony into, and is it being done right now?
See, I believe the communities are actually getting better with that. I look at Destiny and Norman at McLeod Lake.
Yeah.
And they actually had a full ceremony for Truth and Reconciliation Day where they had pictures of people that went to residential school.
Yeah.
Or even just young people that have overdosed.
Yeah.
they were there along with them because obviously it's an effective residential school.
Yeah.
So I really would like to go visit McLeod Lake.
Mm. Yeah.
Like
Other
you know,
nations.
even just to spend a couple of days in a community that I've never been in.
Yeah.
I think maybe
Yeah.
that would be eye-opening.
And that's kind of my intention too, with the work I want to do, because I want to look at different communities and what their practices are. Because, I mean, part of the other issue is we're pan-indigenizing everything.
Yeah.
And, you know, when you think of even Cree and carriers and, you know, having those kind of influences and upbringing, often they're quite conflicting.
Yeah.
So, I mean, even that, addressing that is something that we need to consider. But
And it was interesting this last time I was out at camp. I actually do a teaching on the medicine wheel to these youth. And they, for the most part, they actually do pretty good with their medicine wheel.
Yeah.
But at the end, the one guy, I went and just checked on him to make sure he was okay. And he had this whole spiritual part empty. And I was like, so you couldn't think of like one or two things? And he was like, oh, no, I'm not religious. I was like, this has nothing to do with religion.
Yeah.
What are the ways that you connect with your creator?
Yeah.
Or the creator, but your creator.
Yeah.
And he just didn't know what to say.
Mm.
See, and that part is missing too with an Indigenous people. Like,
Interesting.
it's a relationship. It's not a religion.
Yeah.
That's where that religion part needs to go.
Yeah.
It's because it's all about
agree.
rules, regulations. You can't do this. You can't do that. Like, and everything is evil when it comes to Native. I'm getting tired of that.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't find anything wrong with smudging. It's it has to do with person's heart.
Yeah.
Right? And how they relate to the creator is their personal journey. It has nothing to do with anybody else.
Yeah.
So,
well, and that's part of the reason why I wanted to look at alternative recovery, because I want there to be options that are non-religious, that people that are still spiritual.
Yes.
Because I think that's a huge component of
it
it,
is.
that don't create barriers for others.
Yeah.
Because however, come as you are, and whatever you need is how we will figure this out. Yeah. So on that note, that's our time. It goes really fast. Hey?
Wow.
I know.
Awesome.
I know. Yeah. It's
I
not.
might have to join you again.
Yeah.
We didn't even go through the questions.
I know. No, and you don't, because I think here's the thing when it comes to, it's funny when we think of Indigenous ways of being, there is no way to prepare.
Yeah.
It's what's in your heart.
Yeah.
It's your experience, and that's how we'll find the way.
Yeah.
And if we just listen to the wind and let the spirit guide us.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts that you want to share?
Wow. That we can't be afraid to start our healing, because it is hard and it's messy, but it is so worth it.
Yeah.
But of course, we don't see it in that moment.
Yeah.
And then don't go through life alone.
Yeah.
Like, you need people to process your hard days with.
Yes.
Like, I don't know where I would be without my mentors.
Yeah.
Or the people that I
Same.
trust to share stuff with. Like,
Yeah.
and of course, I don't trust everybody easily.
No.
So it takes time to build that trust.
Yeah.
But yeah.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.